We're live.
We're live.
It's very exciting. Good job by us.
Hey, Mark. Thanks for joining us. And by the way, so I see Mark and Kathy and anybody else. So today, if you didn't see in the announcement, we are basically doing a review of this year, as Terrence putting in the comments. And so we wanted to start off. We were in the green room before this, and Mike was starting to talk about what's going on with the vaccines. I'm like, wait, we got to talk about this.
Save it for the show. Yeah.
So go ahead and say what you were going to say, Mike.
Well, it's just crazy that Moderna comes in with a 94.5, which is like you round that up to an A+.
Right.
But then Pfizer comes in at 0.5 more at 95% when they originally said it was greater than 90%. It's just flashbacks to a competitive public high school on Long Island in the mid 80s, where it's like, oh, you only got a 94.5, we get a 95. Please, you both get A+. Yes. But yeah, that's at least some hopeful news, right? So like that.
Absolutely. I mean, it's interesting because I wrote a piece in I have my Medium blog, and literally on Thursday, I felt like this weight had lifted off because we finally are hearing good news about a vaccine. And no, Mark, you cannot be 0.5 vaccinated. Mark, if you're not careful, I'm going to pull you up here to talk with us. And that's not an idle threat. In any case. Yeah, I mean, I the problem is we're going through this dark tunnel, right? I mean, things are getting worse, even here in California. I thought we had a pretty good handle on it here. And, it's great news about the vaccines and everything, but we're still in this, we're still in, as my husband likes to call it, hockey stick,
Right.
The hockey
it almost feels like, you want the Deus Ex Machina to happen before things get really, really bad, but it's almost like if the crazy save comes in later than you want, which it seems like there's going to be a little bit of that. Like it's going to be it's likely going to be a tough winter. Even I saw Iowa's governor made a reversal on masks, which was really.
Iowa is like, So it's interesting. My husband, he's an engineer, so he's been following this stuff really closely. Yeah, finally they made the thing.
Yeah.
So that he's been following North Dakota and South Dakota because they were trending very high, but then Iowa just suddenly started shooting up. Yeah.
Right. Right.
I'm sorry, Mark. We're gonna have to pull you.
Yeah, Mark, you want to come on? Yeah, we're gonna send you an invite, so you're welcome to join us. Hopefully, you're
discussion because I want to hear about Davenport. But my son is at Lewis and Clark in Portland, and they've been doing really well. But Oregon, more generally, is seeing a real spike, and they're having issues. So he's coming home. He actually got a COVID test this week, so we be sure he's going to be okay. And then drive home on Saturday, and he'll be home until mid-January. And we don't. They're going to have classes. The question is, will he be able to go back? And
they're gonna have. So they'll go home for Thanksgiving and then back for.
No. They don't go back until January. So
but the next semester, right? Mm-hmm.
Yes, toggle terming. That's what. Right. So this is our review show, and one of the things we were talking about is when we had Brian Alexander and Richard Corsi on the show, and Brian was talking about that toggle term, and hey Mark, how you doing?
Not my intention. I'm fine. How are you? It was absolutely not my intention to weasel my way into your show.
Oh, please.
If you've ever seen Brian Alexander's, future trends,
yes, this is the mini Alexander. I had it done at a very nice boutique recently.
Yeah,
nice,
very nice. Anyway, so yeah, we're pulling a Brian Alexander here and pulling you in, and because I remember one time he asked me to just kind of be on, not be on the show, but he said, "Oh, come and watch, and maybe I'll be interested." And then he calls me in, and ends up keeping me on the show the entire hour. So it was fine. But tell us what's going on in Davenport.
Well, Iowa is you're exactly right. It's just and it was just a matter of time here. Our governor is a very nice person, apparently, but clearly takes a particular view about science that she may have received from a rather unscientific source. And Davenport just happens to be right on the border of Illinois and Iowa for people who don't know, people who've done nothing more than fly over us.
I feel like Mark Twain had some Iowa Davenport.
The Mississippi River connection. He's a little downriver from here. Hannibal, Missouri is where his roots are. Although you never know, his Huck Finn adventures might have taken him this far north. I don't know.
Who knows? Yeah.
But Illinois just shut down hard during the first wave. And so guess what? All the folks in Illinois that just didn't want to shut down, what'd they do? They just drove over to Iowa, hang out in all of our bars and restaurants.
Yeah.
And, because thank you, Illinois.
Yeah.
But it was just a matter of time in Iowa, and we've already had you've seen it in the national press. The University of Iowa and Iowa State had major outbreaks in both of those towns when the college year started.
Yeah,
and it was really just a matter of time here. And if people just don't want the pandemic to be so, apparently they can act in that very way.
Yeah.
But science has a way of biting you in the proverbial backside.
Yeah.
And we're in the middle of that now.
Yeah.
I know.
It's also one of those things where I think until things get really dire, frequently folks are not going to be scared straight, which is, I'm in Brooklyn. Like, it got really bad here in March and April. So like people are kind of have been scared straight since April, really, so like, and then there are ways to be safe and out in a somewhat densely populated place, so like we're proof of that, but it's almost like it has to get, otherwise it's just an abstraction, I think. And sadly, like I think it's hard to get everybody that proactive without them really feeling it. It's almost like really the hospital capacity is the thing that we're really talking about. And I think that's really what we're going to be watching.
Right. It was when, you heard that the ambulances in New York City were just every few minutes, and, the refrigerator trucks, and we're seeing that in El Paso now, and the tent cities, for the moderately sick, and all these different things. And I'm sure you've both heard the story about the nurse. I think she talked to CNN about people who, to the very bitter end, were just saying, I can't have COVID. It's a hoax. So it's really. Yeah. So, and even Terrence is hearing in Florida that people are still claiming it's fake, even though the hospitals are. It's like, do you not? What I mean, okay. So, what you think it doesn't matter if it's COVID or the flu or whatever. People are getting sick and going into the hospital. You know.
And I think I think that's the place too. Is like more if people who work in healthcare, if nurses or EMTs or people who are really on the front lines of that, doctors, obviously, that's when I think it changes your perspective. And also if you have someone who you've lost or someone close to you who had a really close scare, I think, and then sadly it does look like the numbers are increasing to the point that more people will have that experience or will know someone close to them who has that experience. And I think that, that and the fact that it also works, like it doesn't fully prevent transmission, but it definitely slows it's the whole flattening the curve thing. Like we were able to do that in New York. Sadly it's rising again here now too, but more slowly.
Yeah. Same
here.
But no,
your point about being in an abstraction, I think is so dead on. And it rings true out here. It is something where if your circle of, it's sort of like the large, this is this perfect storm as an example of the larger problem we have in our body politic, where if you've just surrounded yourselves with people who all believe the same thing and are enthusiastic about only allowing that sort of belief system in your group, that's just that much harder to bang your way into that group with truth that doesn't comport with their belief system.
Yeah.
And COVID is such a perfect example of that. So, you have a 1 out of 10 chance of, getting quite sick, right? Thereabouts, right?
Right.
And let's use that as an arbitrary number. Well, even then, if you're in that 9 of 10 group for a while, that just sort of strengthens your resolve to believe, yeah, it's really not that bad. And this is all things a hoax and da-da-da-da. And then all of a sudden, if you happen to be one of those folks who have an unfortunate overlap with 5 of 1s of 10s.
Right.
All of a sudden it's a completely, but science has a way of winning out.
Right. Well, I think the related idea that I've been thinking more about is how much folks are avoiding care due to the pandemic, and how much that is increasing the lethality of diseases once they're actually caught. And then also folks who are just dying due to like chronic medical conditions that they would have sought care sooner. And then on top of that, it's still in an emergency situation where you actually do need an ICU, depending on where you are and how much they're distracted by, fighting COVID. That's the thing that was really the shock to the system. I think when we saw it happen in Italy, and then we basically saw the same thing happening in New York and some other places, that was where it was like, whoa, this stuff is serious. And I think we're going to see it in the Midwest. I think it does feel like that sort of limited hospital capacity, especially, and it's hitting rural America, which is really kind of interesting as well, where like it was very much hit the urban centers first, and now it's more like rural hospitals and smaller communities are seeing spikes.
As horrible as it is, when Chris Christie got sick and he was in the ICU for a week, all of a sudden it became much more serious and far more people started to take it seriously. Just yesterday, Senator Grassley, our senior senator from Iowa, 87-year-old guy, tested positive for COVID.
Oh, he did? Okay.
And
I heard he was quarantining. I didn't hear he tested positive.
He tested positive. That was right. There was 2 sort of couple hours apart announcements. And right away, the first announcement is I'm going to follow my doctor's advice and, right down the line of whatever everybody's supposed to do. And, I very much hope that he does not have serious problems and he recovers and all these other things.
Yeah.
But sadly, it's those kinds of moments that have the effect of sort of waking people up. And it's very sad that this is what we have to get to.
Right. Right. Well, because Herman Cain died, right?
Yes, he did.
He died of COVID, right? Yeah. I mean, he wasn't as much of an insider, but
well, he went to one of those rallies.
At least a name that you could say you'd heard of, right?
Right. And then Ben Carson, we haven't heard anything about his condition and since he tested
no, we
positive.
haven't. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
And and Terri makes a good point in the comments. Rural America, and actually before I get to that, I want to get to her question, which is I don't know if you've heard what's going on at Grinnell and if they are doing any better than University of Iowa.
So I haven't heard much about Grinnell, but there's some really interesting examples again, I say out here as if I'm out on some sort of scout outpost. But out here, there are almost every small college still tried to start up in person.
Yeah, that's like my son's college.
Because they their financial model didn't allow them to do anything else. And many of them have done very well to keep the numbers of cases down very low. And it seems like there's an interesting study in there somewhere about going to these small institutions and identifying the degree to which there's real buy-in amongst the student body that this is our community and we need to do things to take care of it. And holding that in contrast to the University of Iowa and Iowa State, in the outbreaks that happened there, or some of the other places like UNC Charlotte or UNC Chapel Hill, for example.
Yeah. Well, it's also, I think it's also a bit of a numbers game too, just in terms of there's so many students and the likely that they're going to be aggregating in bigger numbers versus your smaller private colleges are more likely going to have a little more space, and also, and then the smaller town, the quintessential college town in the U.S., like small town college, is probably the challenge. There is more like the parties and the frats and like whatever else might happen. But still, it's probably not going to be as bad as it would be in a really large state school, which is where you do see the really big numbers. And then we always do this week in college football. Anything of note? I forget. How has Iowa? It's what's crazy is I mentioned Iowa, and then you magically appeared, Mark. It was like
we have that level of insecurity. We really do.
Yeah. But was anything crazy on the sports side this week? I was trying to think about that. Nothing jumped out, right?
There have been more and more outbreaks on football teams and games being canceled, which is real interesting when you see these schools say, yep, okay, that game's canceled, that game's going to be canceled, that game's going to be canceled. And you have whole sections of the team on quarantine. My beloved Minnesota Gophers, their first game of the season, nobody on the kicking teams or any of the kickers were available because they all lived together in a house off campus, and one of them tested positive, and so the entire kicking squad was.
What's going on with kickers? The Giants kicker Graham Gano just tested positive as well. Is it something that's maybe like when you really stretch your legs out, when you stretch your hammies out, it makes you more susceptible to the virus? I don't know, but kickers, huh? Interesting.
Something.
Yeah. And then Mark, so you're, aside from being from Iowa, you also work in higher education in some capacity. Did you want to catch us up a little?
I should introduce him because Mark and I have been known each other for a while. He's
that's how Terry and I met.
Yes, I'm a big fan of his because he's created do you call it an app or a website?
A thingamadoodle that exists in the cyberspace deal.
Yes, it's in the interwebs. And in any case, the goal is to demystify the financial aid process and actually allow people to negotiate. Because the one thing people don't know about financial aid and all of that is that you can negotiate. And the best way to do that is to have the most information you can have. And so Mark has been collecting information about financial aid awards and so on and so forth, that when you get that financial aid award, and if you need more, you can find out, okay, what are they doing for everybody else? Did I introduce you properly?
Yeah, it's great. You're always very kind, Terry. So yes, in essence, the tuition fit is just about, let's create a way for the public to create college price transparency, because the public has all of the financial aid award letters every year. Millions of them get mailed out, and they're sitting on kitchen counters or now online portals across the country. And every student's got, one little bit of that giant data set. So if you just share it to a single place, you create a Kelley Blue Book for college prices or a TrueCar or whatever metaphor you want. And then it's a free exchange of information. So the student shares information, they get to see what other students like them have shared. And it gives the public a little bit more of an even playing field, an even place in the college admissions process. I will say, though, part of the reason that we started this is that transparency is a necessity now for institutions too. The old school notion that price signals your quality, that's not the signal that the public's getting. The signal the public's getting is, why waste my time talking to school X or school Y, because that price 5 times outside of my range.
Yeah.
And what the family doesn't know is that school is also discounting the average student at that school 4.5 times off the range. So it's a great fit.
Yeah.
But you do the normal human thing and say, there's no chance. I'm not going to waste my time on looking at something there's no way that's ever going to happen.
Yeah.
And that's the absurdity of the whole thing, is that for many cases, for many students, it's an entirely plausible possibility, but you would never know that. So
it takes us back to our very first episode of This Week in Higher Ed, where we talked about tuition discounting, which was Megan Novicelli, I think, right?
Right.
Yes, because we were supposed to reflect back through the years too. So we wanted to get perspective from Iowa, which was an amazing bonus, and then also we did want to understand some of the trends you're talking about, Mark, are right in line with some of the stuff that we've been tracking really throughout the year, and then even Grinnell, which I think Tarrant mentioned. Grinnell, they also were in the news as well recently for their plan to go loan free in for the fall of 2021.
Next fall.
Yeah, exactly. Any perspective from either of you on that? Because I thought that was a really interesting trend. The other article that I shared in the chat, I can put it back here again, as well as UT Austin.
My old stomping
ground. Which is your stomping ground, but around Pell Grants, which also seems like another one to bring Mark's perspective in as well, because I think that's kind of part of the whole universe that we're talking about.
Yeah. So I'll start off, because I think it's really interesting. I think we're going to see this more and more, because I think, especially now that first of all, there was the pressure that existed even before COVID, and then COVID put more pressure on pricing, and now we're seeing a candidate who is now our president-elect, who is saying we're going to basically make sure that we cut back on these student loans and things like that. So the people who could be hurt the most by this is privates, right? And privates need to be able to attract students and, who are coming with significant financial aid, because, it's better than trying to cut their prices. Oops, Mike, we lost Mike for a second there. But, in any case, oops, what's going on? Okay. I can still see. Can you hear me still, Mark? Oh my goodness, we're having a... Okay, here we go. That was strange. We had a little internet blurb there, and I'm sure Mike will be back any minute now.
Okay, yeah.
I was saying that
I thought I was running the show for a second, and I thought that's not what I signed up for. I just dropped in.
I know. Well, thank goodness you're here, so I'm not stuck by myself. But probably Mike's internet went out, and he's the host, so that's probably why we had that little blurb there. But in any case, I was going to say that the stress. So privates could be hurt the most by not getting these students who are bringing significant financial aid with them, because that's better than having to just discount. And so I think even I noticed that where I was previously as a provost, Menlo College is really pushing to get students with things like Pell Grants and who have coming in with lots of aid, because they're already discounting. But it also drives me crazy. And we talked about this in our first show a couple months ago. There's Mike. Yay.
Nothing to see here. about your live cast.
Yeah. Well, we kept going. We're fine.
Smooth.
But anyway, it's always, we have a lot of fun.
We wanted to see what it was. We were pranking Mark. We wanted to see if Mark could land the plane. We wanted to see if you could land the plane, Mark.
Yeah, that was a little bizarre, I have to say.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
Yeah, I did improv for a couple of years.
There you go. It shows. But anyway, we were answering. You were answering a question.
Yeah.
Apologies. Yeah.
Yeah. So I was talking about. So I think there's going to be a lot of pressure on privates because, and this whole issue of pricing. I mean, I've talked to admissions, people who are like, oh, we have to keep the price right high because like you were saying, Mark, it's a measure of quality. But then, as there's more and more pressure on enrollments, that you're not getting the best students, right? Because some of the best students can't afford to go to your school if you don't reduce the price. So, and like you said, Mark, it's part of it's because of the way, the idiotic way we do it, where, it's like buying a car. Everybody knows when you buy a car, that you have to negotiate and, you just have to figure out a way to do this where you're saying, okay, here's our real price. And if you need financial aid, and they need to be more upfront about that because, I'm, a couple years ago when I was getting my son ready to apply for schools, I was looking at the books and the websites, and it doesn't say anywhere on, they say, oh yes, you can apply for financial aid, blah, blah, blah. But we didn't know until we got his admission into the school he's at now that even he got we didn't even do a FAFSA, but he did get a scholarship. So it's like, okay. And for him, his mother knows too much. She's like, sorry, son, it's not a real scholarship. That's just a discount rate. I shouldn't have told him that, but sorry, I have to keep it real. So
yeah.
But anyway, but before I pass it off to Mark, I just want to mention UT Austin has always had a pretty strong program to bring in students from low-income areas. They had the Longhorn Scholar program, which I used to run, and then it's transitioned now into a new program. And they were really smart and worked with the Dell Foundation to bring in a big chunk of money to allow them to give more scholarships. So they actually increased the number of students who are getting Pell Grants. And that's kind of the percentage of students getting Pell Grants, or the number of students getting Pell Grants. That's like the rule you look at to see what are you really serving the state more broadly. And UT Austin has had a bad reputation of not really serving the state more broadly, but that changed actually when they created the 10% rule, which means you're getting, and actually the interesting thing about that is, even though it was designed to get diversity, it actually encouraged people from rural areas and areas that hadn't traditionally sent students to UT to go there. So it really diversified the student body in many more ways than just by race or ethnicity. Anyway,
and I'm not going to comment on how also Austin is a great place to be if you're in Texas. So I could see why folks who are in the know. But please, Mark, I'd love to get some of your perspective on anything Terri was just talking about.
Yeah, we were actually talking about a different question, but a series of things happened in between when that question was asked and now, including shocking the heck out of me and leaving me to run the show by myself.
Yeah, so why don't you talk about that then? That would be amazing. Yeah.
I actually don't remember what the question was. We were talking about Grinnell a little bit. I think we were talking about the loans. So Grinnell is not the first school to have done this. And they certainly were a school that has had the money to do it. If people remember back 15 years ago or so, there was a point at which Grinnell had more money in their endowment per student than any other institution in the country. And I think a faculty member there wrote a column that was in the Chronicle about what happens if you're actually too wealthy as a school. Like, at some point, do you just stop charging anybody anything to go there? Grinnell didn't ultimately take that path, but they've had the money to do this, and they have always been a school that sits in that pantheon of very elite, very selective schools. But they don't have the fortune of being out in Southern California or on the coast in the Bay Area or in beautiful Western Massachusetts. And they have always had to work a little bit harder to get that caliber student from suburban areas, more populated parts of the country. My bet is that as one of the things we've seen, that students are less inclined to go farther away than they were. Grinnell is finding that they're going to have to find other ways to sweeten the pot a bit to get the same kind of students that they were getting before.
Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah. Makes sense even in terms of your example, Terry. You know, your son's in Portland. You know, like it's like regionally he's not that far from where you are.
Drive, you know, it's a long car drive, but
Yeah.
you know, and it's funny because with my younger son, you know, before COVID, I was thinking, oh, you know, it'd be good to send him to the East Coast, and now I'm like, no, you're staying on the West Coast. You know,
right.
We're gonna look at around here, and I need you to be within a car's drive away.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, it'll be interesting to also watch for like low residency programs is the other thing that I think is a trend to keep an eye on. I remember I was looking at Goddard College, which is very small, but like their whole approach is you know, shorter stints where everybody comes together. It's almost like you're seeing that that idea emerge now on the workforce side too, where like if we're going to have, you know, a corporate headquarters, we're going to be much more intentional about when we need to bring people together, we will do it in a very sort of thoughtful way, and then they'll disperse, you know, and even, you know, we did talk to Dr. Corsi about the ventilation and how we're thinking about the design architecture of higher education, how that's all going to change. You know, it is an interesting time to look ahead. You know, we're both reflecting back on the fall semester, but I think in addition to Thanksgiving, I think people are starting to wonder about what 2021 year is going to look like for higher education. Either of you have any thoughts on how it might proceed? You know, because I was thinking how higher ed intersects with the administration of the vaccine is a really interesting thing to keep an eye on, because it does, you know, it's a population that could very likely be spreading the virus, and then generally they are somewhat controlled by the university, and like the university has some responsibility for like healthcare, public health on campus. I'm curious how that'll intersect, because that'll likely, you know, especially for the schools that are having some, you know, on campus stuff. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I actually saw something about this where there's an issue of, you know, our college is going to require students to take the vaccination before they come to campus. And I remember when I was at UCLA, or when I was in grad school back in the 90s, they actually, and still, I think they have a requirement that you have to up-to-date MMR and all. They check your vaccination records. And if you're missing any vaccinations, you cannot register for classes until you get vaccinated. And so I think we're going to see that happen, and I'm curious if we're going to see any, you know, kind of anti-vaxxer movements or pushback on that, because this is a little, you know, it's not, you know, like we don't require people to get the flu shot, even though people can die from it.
Yeah. So, and then also the anti-vaxxers, you would assume might also be the people who want to be in person. Like if you're anti-vaxxer and you're also doing entirely remote, and you're advocating for not being on campus, like that's at least a more like consistent position than to be saying no vaccines and we have to do in person, which is more the herd immunity argument, which sadly is, I guess, still out there, but that's kind of what the vaccine does. But Mark, any thoughts on you want in addition to dropping the entire webcast onto you, we're also going to get your perspective on 2021 and where some of this stuff may be heading.
We know you have totally zero medical expertise, but hey.
Right. So, you know, I'm fresh out of leeches, so my medical knowledge really is I really couldn't say much about that, but you know, so one thing is, just because a vaccine becomes available doesn't it becomes widely available, right? And how it gets disseminated and in what way are we that organized and when. so many unanswered questions there. It's hard to sort of know how all of this will play out. The university could require students to get vaccinated, and then those students can't because there's no place to go, right?
Right.
So those issues are certainly still out there. I do think that this trend that we saw with this most recent freshman class to start to think more about staying a little bit closer to home, I think that trend will continue.
Yeah.
And I think that will continue to intersect with the I'm not paying $60,000 to go to a school where if I have to take the classes online, there's just no payoff there. So I think that, take that and intersect it with our, seized up economy. And I do think that there's some real changes in the calculus that's in the typical family's head. The other thing that's playing out, and I'm really curious to see how this plays out, is the proportion of students that are applying to college without submitting a test score is through the roof. Just through the roof. Recent surveys in California were something like 70%, which if it's California kids applying, that's fine but you still, and something like the number of applications so far from Common App data is down, but it's down in the single digit percentile. So like 8%. That still means that there's a whole bunch of institutions that are going to get tens of thousands of applications for maybe 3,000 or 4,000 spots. And their method for sifting through those applications has really taken a hit because they no longer have that test score to lean on and cull that pile of applications. And so I'm really curious to see how all of that then affects the way that those institutions process applications, the way the public responds to not being able to sort of find out if I got in or I didn't get in and how, and what sort of calculations those individuals make in terms of all of the things that are going on in the public sphere that I just mentioned, with the increased opacity of the application process. I think that we could see some really interesting changes in institutions that are, for example, regional public institutions that have been struggling for enrollment for years, and all of a sudden they're seeing a very robust class.
Right. Well, and then also the online side of this is also going to be really interesting, whether it's, Western Governors or Southern New Hampshire or Arizona State, like the bigger, just go online. There's a lot of that already was out there, but, particularly if you can reduce the cost of tuition, actually cut the family a break to be intentional about going online, particularly for some period of time when they may prefer that option anyway. And then when you go online, can you actually go faster? Which is another, I think we were talking to Brandon Bastide about that, among others, earlier on this show. I do think it's opening up some interesting questions, almost like the equivalent. It's not quite the equivalent of homeschooling, but it's like, being intentional about the decision not to want to go to campus and then still trying to advance your own sort of portfolio and your hireability. That does seem like a trend that caught some tailwinds with the pandemic. Any perspective, Mark, from you on that?
Well, it's been 10 years since we started seeing books written about the unbundling, right? And it's been a good 10 years of folks going, okay, when is that unbundling really going to play out, right?
Right.
And I think part of the reason why that didn't happen was because take your average person who's thinking about college or university, whether they're traditional or non-traditional, and you tell them, hey, you can unbundle. And they would say, oh, how? What? What do I do? And how do I know? Because eventually I have to have a degree from some institution. And there's no real certainty that institution is going to exactly take the credit I bring to them. and put it in the spot that I need it to be in.
Right.
In fact, the reputation is often that institutions do the opposite, right? They just stick it into that general category so they can keep you around for another year. And that sounded ultra conspiratorial. I'm very, very sorry to all the academic committees that have made choices otherwise over the last the years. But what COVID and the pandemic sort of did was it made it possible for that little kid in the Emperor's New Clothes story to say he's naked, and everybody else to go, yeah, he is naked. And what followed was just sort of, hey, you know what? I guess we're sort of have to start unbundling, and maybe that's not such a bad thing after all.
Yeah.
And might as well do it, because what else are you going to do? So one of the things that you saw hidden in the reports from the Student Clearinghouse that was been, really the best way to see how enrollments have been playing out now this fall is you see increase in the students taking classes from online universities and for-profits, and you don't see nearly the same kind of drops in part-time enrollments that you're seeing in full-time.
Right.
And I think we can figure out what's going on there. People are starting to say, well, all right, I'll go part-time. I'll take a class. I'll do this other thing. Maybe I'll find a remote job somewhere as a telemarketer and manage through this thing. But as a function of that, I think that unbundling is now got some headwind or got some tailwind momentum that it just didn't have before.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's why we see the rise in, we've actually seen an increase in enrollment for profits, because you can go part-time.
Yep.
And part of the problem with, your typical college campus is that you can't go part-time.
Right.
And you're expected to take a certain number. And actually, but the other component of that is it connects to financial aid. You don't get as much financial aid if or you sometimes don't get any financial aid if you decide to go part-time. So, all kinds of incentives. And I think that comes back to Terrence's comment where her friend was saying that COVID might accelerate, people initially thought COVID was going to accelerate the popping of the higher ed bubble, but it might do the opposite and actually increase the number of people who are going after those scarce spots. But I don't know. I think that, the smaller, we've talked about this over and over, that the small private liberal arts, the SPLACs,
yes,
going to, be hurt badly by this. I think you can see that in Grinnell's move to, cut out loans. I think a lot of institutions are just holding their breath to see if they can get their students back on campus. I know here in the Bay Area, dorms are not open except for a small number of students. And whereas, where my son is, their dorms were 70% full. So they didn't take a hit, financial hit as the schools down the road from me. And schools that, there's another Palo Alto University is mostly focused on graduate education, so there's schools that are surviving and actually may thrive in this environment, that on graduate level education that allow students to go part-time and, are going to cost an arm and a leg and all these different things. And so, people are going to need to retool.
Yeah, well, exactly. You start thinking about the non-traditional learner, like that market is huge. And those people, many of them may be out of work or are, their jobs shifting in ways that they're going to need to get more training to maybe, hop into a new field, maybe something that is more digital, like how will higher ed respond to that? And who else will be trying to respond to that? What happens to the boot camps, many of whom, the like data science and coding boot camps, many of them had a very, it was a boot camp. Like you're actually in the same physical environment as the people, and it's intense, 6-8 weeks. Like that's not likely going to be COVID safe, at least until the vaccine is widely out there. So how do those educational institutions pivot into online? And because what I've seen around the adult learner too is that many of them are less interested in the full degree and are more interested in some kind of targeted certification or a more like job readiness credential that will get them either employed or get them further along in their career. Either of you have any perspective on that?
Go ahead, Mark.
Fire away, Terri.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, I do have a lot of perspectives on that because, part of the issue is how do we get a lot of people who need to be reskilled through programs quickly and efficiently and at low cost, right? And that's why you've seen the rise of Southern New Hampshire and Western Governors and some of the programs. And the other thing I think the other thing we're going to see though is what we're seeing at ASU, which is the collaborations like between Amazon and Starbucks and the big employers saying, well, we're just going to work with you to educate because we need an educated workforce. So we're going to bring them in and then educate them as they're still working. So I think you're going to see a lot of more trends in that direction. But that doesn't, it's interesting because I try to overlay that on the broader picture and space of higher ed right now. And we're not there yet, right? ASU has always been in the lead on this stuff in Southern New Hampshire. We keep saying these same entities and, Purdue's trying, but, they're getting a lot of pushback for a variety of reasons. And, it's funny because I sometimes I laugh at the people who would say, oh, higher ed's over. They've been saying that for years and it's not. It's a very durable set of institutions. And it's because of our attachment to things like sports and, the University of Iowa, Stanford, UCLA.
For
they have a certain
cultural significance.
They have extreme cultural significance. I'm a season ticket holder. We can't go now, of course, but to Stanford football games, and I'm sure my sons will be attached to their institutions and whatever, and so if you think about how much the money that goes into maintaining this idea of the marketing, it's not just related to sports, but it's a machine. And we're going through a crisis, but it's not the first time higher ed has been through a crisis, and it's not the last. And what is going to happen is we're going to have to learn from this crisis and figure out how do we prepare for this in a way that allows us to survive and thrive in this situation. And, I think a lot of institutions are doing just fine. Actually, it's a lot better than we were expecting, right? With the enrollment drop-offs are not anywhere near what we were expecting. And so, I do think that there's a great amount of resilience out there because and it's not just because of the financials, it's because of the cultural place that higher ed has in so many communities.
Yeah, makes sense. Mark, I thank you. By the way, you've been very gracious, staying on camera and even flying the plane briefly there. So thank you again for your service. But we also wanted to am I right in that you have some particular expertise around international students and trends in that space as well, or at least how that relates to tuition? I thought I heard that, or maybe I'm wrong.
Well, I did spend a fair amount of my time as a researcher studying international education and internationalization, study abroad, those kinds of things. I may or may not have contributed to a book or two.
Yeah. Good. Okay. So I wasn't wrong there. So that's good. And then like how does that factor into what we've been talking about, or any perspective you might have on, obviously the ability to travel has been limited and likely for maybe the next year or so, but you start looking at fall of 2021, any perspective?
Well, international student enrollment was just dropped off the cliff. I think the number I saw was something like 43% down, which is just stunning. It's just a stunning number. I have not seen how that broke down by graduate student or undergraduate students breakdown, but a 43% drop is just massive. And the institutions that were really, depending on higher paying international students have really suffered because of that. But it's international students are not equally distributed across institutions by any means. So, it's one of those things where there's a lot of institutions that don't have very many international students, or the ones they do, they gave them big discounts just like everybody else. And so it didn't really play out. But I do think to play the role that we've played as a country internationally, as a place to go for higher education for people all across the world, that place was already slipping. Mm-hmm. And now I think if we want to return to that, we are in a world of hurt. Yeah. Because so many other institutions around the world are seeing their opportunity, have already been taking that opportunity. Yeah. And in fact, there's some real growth amongst the English speaking or teaching in English institutions across the Commonwealth and across the European Union, that have started to aggressively recruit in the United States for undergraduates. And for example, in your neck of the woods, Mike, the University of Dublin or Cardiff in Wales says to a student, well, if you want to go to college in California or you want to go to college here, it's the same distance in essentially, right? You have to fly either way. Right. And we can give you a bachelor's degree in 3 years for a fraction of the cost it would cost you to go to school out in California for 4. Right. What are you waiting for? Right. Mm-hmm. And that's got some legs. Totally. And well, especially institutions. Yeah, especially to the cultural significance piece. Like if you're studying abroad, that is a pretty profound experience. So, I think a lot of parents and young people can get behind that proposition in terms of the return. Maybe they will have organized sports. It'll just be like, cricket and curling, curling, Australian rules. No. What's so interesting, you point that out, but what's so interesting is that those schools are now their sales pitch is almost flipped so that they're sort of depending upon, they're sort of banking on the homogeneity of culture, right? Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. We've got McDonald's, we have got Kentucky Fried Chicken, we've got, whatever store you've heard of, right? You can get Amazon in Cardiff, Wales, just like you can get Amazon in New York City. Yeah. So what's the difference? Right. And that whole thing sort of flipped on its head, right? Yeah. And that's a really interesting evolution. Yeah. Well, and also you imagine the things that appeal are like access to Taco Bell, high-speed internet. You know what I mean? And then as parents or folks further along in our lives, it's like, and you'll be, and
the drinking age is lower.
Oh, there you go. There you go. And beer on balance is better, right? So,
oh my God.
But I mean, this is where your head explodes when you start talking about going to a Welsh Taco Bell, right? These are trends now in higher education internationally. The gap year thing, I don't know that it really did become what some folks were writing that it would become this last year, because it was sort of, well, where are you going to go?
Right. And we're still in the middle. We're still kind of in the middle of it too. Right. What are people? I don't think people know exactly what folks who have chosen to take an alternative path are doing just yet. Like that research is still coming in, and it looks like it may just be again, getting back to the good news at the top around the vaccines, like it may be that by fall of 2021, there's a new normal that's a little more like the old normal than everything we're going to experience right through the spring into the summer. That seems like that's the most favorable. It's not going to go any faster than that. You got to imagine the early terms in 2021 are going to be fraught just because it's going to be such a confusing time, not to mention the rollout of the vaccine, which you touched on a bit, Mark, is just going to be, who knows what it's going to be. And then Terri, we're going to be, I think we're going to take a couple weeks off. We're going to come back on December 9th, we were saying, but any perspective from you as our resident political scientist around where some policy may happen, or anything politically that you want to put yourself out there and say you expect these things to happen Um, Eddie, do we are we gonna have faithful electors? Like what's going on?
Joe Biden is going to get inaugurated on January 20th, and Donald Trump is going to make it as difficult as he possibly can between now and then, because that's just the way he is. And we're going to have we won't have as smooth a transition as we would like, but it will happen. But I think the interesting thing, I just was so I got the letter from the president of Lewis and Clark College as a parent of a student there, and he was talking about the impact of the Biden administration. And actually for me, one of the things it's going to impact is and for not just me personally, but campuses across the nation have been worried about this executive order around diversity training, and that's something that's going to go away immediately. I expect it to be one of the first executive orders will be to get rid of that executive order, because we're in a situation where that's actually a critical thing. We need diversity training, and Biden administration, I can't imagine they would even consider keeping that in place. It's ridiculous, and if the only reason there haven't been lawsuits against it is because people were waiting to see if Biden won, and because you could easily put out some lawsuits against that and it would get struck down, like so many of the other executive orders have, including today on immigration, or either yesterday or today on immigration. But before we go, I just want to take a couple minutes. I just saw the announcement. I posted it in the link in the chat, is that New York public schools are shutting down. And so that means that we're going to see a lot. It's basically, New York is the canary in the coal mine in so many ways. And so I think we're just going to see that sweeping across the country. It's interesting. I was on I was talking somewhere, and somebody was saying, "Oh, Biden's going to shut down the country," and I was like, "No, he's not." First of all, because by the time he gets into office, it'll be too late, and secondly, we're going to see that at the state level. And what Biden is saying is he's going to mandate masks, but by the time, again, by January 20th, if Iowa is mandating masks, maybe South Dakota won't, but I think everybody is going to be mandating masks by January 20th, and he won't even have to do anything. So I think, the nice thing that is going to change and is starting to change is we're going to see what we need desperately. And that comes back to your point earlier, Mark, where people from Illinois were just popping over the border into Iowa, right, to go party. And I think what we're going to have to see is a coordinated effort of saying no, shelter in place in your own home for 2 weeks so we can get a hold on this thing. And that doesn't mean a complete shutdown. It just means don't travel. Just stay in your local community.
It's like watch some Netflix, order some delivery and get over yourself, for assuming you can do that. Not everyone has those things that they're, but if you can order in a little bit and watch some. Hopefully sports is still there. That's the thing. And it looks like the NBA draft is tonight. It's like there'll be programming diversions.
NFL's going to keep going.
Yeah.
Some of the college that we've seen so many games get canceled in college football. I don't know what's going to happen, but I do think that we're going to see, we're at that critical point where we have to do something now. It's going to be wait until January 20th.
Yeah. And we'll be back. We'll be back again in December, right? December 9th. I think we were saying, well, we're going to take a Thanksgiving week off and then get organized coming back. So the week of the 9th, Wednesday the 9th, 3 weeks from today. 3 weeks from today. 3 weeks from today, we'll be back, and there'll be lots of stuff. Maybe we'll have another willing victim like Mark get volunteered in. Mark, thanks again for joining. Really appreciate your perspective. That was fun. We never did that before, so thank you for hopping on.
Yeah,
I have been a guinea pig for so many things, but that's probably more than I should have shared on a live internet.
Indeed.
Yeah, and I guess we're good then, Terri. Any final closing thoughts from you?
No, I would say, if you have ideas or thoughts, please share them with us. We're always looking for interesting topics and things that people want to hear from us. So let us know.
Remember self-care over the holidays, and hopefully you can let the people know you appreciate them. I'm very thankful for this show, Terri. This has been a lot of fun. I'm looking forward to it on the other side, and hopefully everyone stays safe. And we come back in a few weeks to a good show.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome.
All right.
Thanks all.
Thanks for having me.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.